Imagine a king standing over a city that knows it may soon be surrounded. Beyond the walls waits the most feared army of the age. Inside the city are families, soldiers, children, priests, and a single terrible question: when the enemy comes, how long until the water runs out? That was the crisis facing Jerusalem in the days of King Hezekiah. And the answer was not just prayer, not just courage, not just walls. It was one of the most astonishing engineering moves in the ancient world. A tunnel cut through solid rock beneath the city, built to keep Jerusalem alive when destruction seemed close. The Bible remembers it. Archaeology confirms it. And even now, thousands of years later, people still walk through the darkness of that underground passage and ask the same question: how did they do it? To understand why this tunnel was so extraordinary, you have to begin with the danger. Hezekiah ruled Judah in the late 8th century BC. During a time when the Assyrian Empire dominated the region with brutal power. Kingdom after kingdom fell under Assyrian pressure. Their kings did not merely conquer, they crushed resistance, demanded tribute, and made examples of those who refused to submit. Jerusalem was not facing some distant rumor of conflict. It was living in the shadow of one of history's most terrifying superpowers. Britannica notes that Hezekiah fortified Jerusalem and built an underground tunnel, while the biblical record connects his preparations to the city's defense under threat. Now picture the geography of ancient Jerusalem. A city can have brave defenders, thick walls, and determined leadership, but if its main water source lies exposed outside or near the vulnerable edge of its defenses, then that city has a deadly weakness. Jerusalem's key water source was the Gihon Spring. If invaders controlled access to it, the city would be trapped. A siege is not only about swords, fire, and broken gates. A siege is about thirst. It is about waiting. It is about making a population collapse before the walls ever do. That is why water was not a side issue. Water was survival. And if Hezekiah wanted Jerusalem to endure, he needed to do something extraordinary with that spring. The biblical text says he blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon Spring and channeled the water down to the west side of the city of David. This is where the story stops being merely political and becomes almost unbelievable. Hezekiah's answer was not just to guard the spring more carefully. His answer was to redirect the water itself. Instead of allowing the city's lifeline to remain exposed, the plan was to bring that water into a more secure area through an underground passage. Think about what that meant in the ancient world. No electric drills. No laser measurement. No modern maps. No engines. No heavy machinery. No floodlights. Just labor, stone tools, determination, planning, and the pressure of time. Every blow into the rock was part of a survival strategy. Every meter gained meant another step toward keeping Jerusalem alive. And then comes the part that still stuns people today. The tunnel was not simply carved in a straight line from one side to the other by a single team inching forward. The famous inscription associated with the tunnel describes two groups of workers cutting through the rock from opposite ends until they finally heard one another and broke through. Let that sink in. Deep underground, with ancient methods, without modern engineering instruments, two teams moved through stone toward a meeting point they could not see, until the final barrier between them gave way. This is the kind of detail that makes the story feel almost impossible, yet it is one of the most celebrated features of the tunnel's history. Try to imagine the sound of that moment. Hammer against stone. Chisel striking rock. Sweat in the dark. Water in the distance. The air close and damp. Workers listening with desperate concentration. Then, faintly, the sound of other men cutting through from the opposite side. Not rumor. Not hope. Real sound. Human voices or hammer blows coming through the rock. One team realizing that somewhere ahead, beyond the darkness and stone, another team is coming toward them. Then the final breach. Light, sound, water, victory. In that moment, engineering became deliverance. The tunnel was not just a project anymore. It was proof that Jerusalem had a chance. The tunnel itself adds even more mystery to the achievement. Hezekiah's tunnel is not a perfectly straight channel. It curves. It wins. It feels like the work of men adapting in real time to the underground world around them. That has led to endless fascination. Why is it shaped that way? One explanation is that the builders followed natural fractures or softer paths in the rock. Another is that they adjusted their course by listening and responding to sound from the opposing team. Others have argued that the system may have built on earlier waterworks or reflected the terrain beneath the city in ways that made a straight line unrealistic. Whatever the exact explanation, the shape of the tunnel does not weaken the achievement. It magnifies it. Because this was not engineering performed on open ground under ideal conditions. This was engineering inside rock, under pressure, for survival. And here is what makes the story even more powerful for a biblical documentary: this is not just legend floating in isolation. The Bible directly preserves the memory of Hezekiah's water project. 2 Kings refers to the pool and the tunnel, and how he brought water into the city. 2 Chronicles says Hezekiah blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon and directed the water down the west side of the city of David. In other words, the biblical narrative does not simply present Hezekiah as a king who prayed in crisis. It also remembers him as a ruler who planned, acted, fortified, and engineered. He was preparing a city to survive one of the greatest threats of its age. That balance matters. Sometimes people imagine the biblical world only in terms of kings, prophets, battles, and miracles, as if practical intelligence and technical skill belong only to later civilizations. Hezekiah's tunnel shatters that assumption. It reminds us that ancient people were not simplistic figures moving through a flat religious story. They were builders, strategists, labor organizers, problem solvers. They understood terrain, water flow, stone, danger, and time. Their world was spiritual, yes, but it was also fiercely practical. Faith did not cancel action. In this case, leadership meant turning fear into preparation. The backdrop to all of this was the Assyrian threat, especially the campaign of Sennacherib in 701 BC. Jerusalem was not a city living comfortably at peace. It was a city bracing for impact. Britannica summarizes that Hezekiah built fortifications and an underground tunnel but was still forced to pay heavy tribute to Sennacherib. This detail is important because it shows the tunnel was not some ceremonial achievement built for show. It belonged to a real world of war, diplomacy, fear, and survival. This was a project born from pressure. It was a response to the fact that in the ancient Near East, weakness was punished mercilessly. And that is why the tunnel feels so dramatic even now. It represents a hidden weapon. When enemies looked at Jerusalem, they saw walls, gates, towers, defenders. But beneath the visible city, a secret lifeline was being secured. The most important flow in the city was being drawn inward, protected, hidden, redirected. That is brilliant wartime thinking. Instead of simply strengthening the obvious points of defense, Hezekiah's Jerusalem addressed the invisible weakness that could have doomed everything. It is easy to admire walls because walls are visible. But sometimes the real genius of a civilization lies underground. Modern discovery only deepened the wonder. In 1880, an inscription connected with the tunnel was found near its southern end. That inscription preserved the memory of the breakthrough, describing the meeting of the workers as they cut through the rock from opposite ends. Later the inscription was removed and eventually ended up in Istanbul, but its importance has never faded. Suddenly, what the Bible remembered and what the stone itself preserved came together in an astonishing way. This was no vague tradition about an old king doing something impressive with water. That debate exists, and it is worth acknowledging honestly. But the broad historical picture remains powerful. The Bible explicitly attributes a major water diversion project to Hezekiah, and the tunnel has long been associated with his defensive preparations for the Assyrian crisis. Even where scholarly arguments differ on details, the scale and brilliance of the water system remain undeniable. And maybe that honesty actually strengthens the story. Because the greatness of Hezekiah's tunnel does not depend on pretending there are no debates in archaeology. Its greatness lies in the stone itself, in the passage still there beneath Jerusalem, in the fact that ancient builders created a functioning water tunnel through bedrock, in the inscription celebrating the meeting of the diggers, and in the biblical memory of a king who understood that if water could be secured, a city could still breathe under siege. The details scholars debate sit on top of something much larger. This was ancient engineering of a very high order. What kind of leadership sees a problem like that and chooses a solution like this? That may be one of the most fascinating questions in the whole story. Hezekiah could have responded to fear with panic. He could have done nothing and hoped for the best. He could have trusted only in tribute, only in walls, only in diplomacy. Instead, the record presents a king who prepared. He fortified. He redirected. He secured. He acted before the worst moment arrived. That is one reason this tunnel still speaks so powerfully today. It is a monument not only to labor, but to foresight. And think about the workers themselves. Great kings are remembered by name, but tunnels are cut by ordinary hands. Somewhere in that darkness were men whose names have vanished, yet whose work outlived empires. The Assyrians terrified nations. Their armies moved like storms across the region. Their kings carved their boasts into stone. Yet here we are, centuries later, still marveling not at an Assyrian siege ramp in this story, but at a Judean tunnel. The empire threatened. The builders endured. There is something deeply moving about that. Hezekiah's tunnel also changes how we picture the Bible's world physically. Too often people imagine biblical events happening in a vague spiritual landscape, disconnected from stone, mud, sweat, topography, logistics, and engineering. But the Bible happened in real places, among real political pressures, with real infrastructure and real survival problems. Jerusalem needed water. Enemies were real. The spring was real. The tunnel was real. That matters because it grounds the biblical story in the weight of history. This is not a floating symbol. It is an underground passage that can still be traced. It belongs to the stubborn physical reality of the ancient city. So was Hezekiah's tunnel the Bible's most shocking engineering achievement? You could make a strong case that it was. Not only because of the technical difficulty of cutting through rock. Not only because of the drama of two teams meeting underground. Not only because of the wartime urgency behind it. But because it overturns modern assumptions. It forces us to recognize that the ancient biblical world was capable of astonishing practical intelligence. This was not primitive improvisation. This was calculated, coordinated, large-scale engineering with life and death stakes. Beneath Jerusalem, hidden from the surface, lies a message carved in stone and water. When a city faced its greatest danger, it answered with ingenuity. When fear threatened to choke hope, men cut a path through rock. When survival hung on a spring, leadership turned geography into defense. That is why Hezekiah's tunnel still shocks the world. It is not merely an ancient tunnel. It is a monument to strategic vision, human endurance, and the refusal to surrender a city to thirst. And maybe that is why this story still grips us. Because deep down, we all understand what the tunnel represents. It represents the work nobody sees that keeps everything else alive. It represents wisdom before crisis, not after it. It represents hidden strength. While armies marched above ground, the future of Jerusalem flowed through darkness below. So the next time someone thinks the Bible's world was simple, fragile, or technologically helpless, remember this tunnel. Remember the rock. Remember the water. Remember the sound of two teams digging toward each other beneath a threatened city. And remember that one of the ancient world's most remarkable engineering achievements was not built to impress tourists, celebrate luxury, or glorify comfort. It was built to save lives. If this story changed the way you see the Bible and the ancient world, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling me this. Do you think Hezekiah's tunnel is the most shocking engineering achievement in biblical history, or is there another one that deserves that title?